So if you actually get to heaven, they don't ask you to do shit like this because it's not paid work. But yeah, so this book's called Kauri Creek by Kris with a K, Lovesey with a L. First we have Blackie and the Bigfoot. Blackie has mounds of time to think of the past couple months, and a lot of it is revolving around the past week and a half. Being trapped in his functionless mortal coil was not what Blackie was used to. He is very familiar with the whole slew of alternative realities, perceptions, levels of consciousness, and the unconscious, but he knows once the drink and drugs wear off, he is once again on the side of the hill. The hill and Blackie have a mutually protective relationship. He keeps the hill clean and pristine, and in return, the hill keeps him safe, almost immortal. People are immortal till they die, of course. Blackie believed this so completely, he systematically refused to enter certain major cities: London, Paris, Washington, D.C., Berlin, and especially Atlanta, as well as large movie theaters. Blackie is relatively superstitious in his habits, but none hinder Blackie in his many, many forms of fun. Blackie is Blackie. Meet him and wonder. In his coma, he's wearing his favorite belt buckle, looking for adventure. He is in fact trapped in a hospital in Thames, New Zealand. Life is not so bad in a coma, or whatever this non-state was. It has its perks. Comas are handy as a life-saving state the human body will go into when it's pretty sure is going to die. He's unlucky not to be dead and eaten up by the wild pigs in the area. The pigs living up on the hill are mean and smart, and the only thing stopping the pigs from taking over the whole country of New Zealand is their lack of opposable thumbs and trigger fingers. Piece of shit. Last fall, he had the pleasure of walking into this little lean-to up on the hill to find a medium-sized lady pig with his hunting rifle on the floor, the barrel propped up on a book, trying frantically to pull the trigger with her snout. That was the last time he shot a pig indoors. Well, kind of indoors. The lean-to was a glorified tent. The mess it made was not worth the wild pork sausages, chops, and cat food. Luckily, Blackie grabbed the handgun before Miss Pig actually pulled the trigger on him. He is safe from the pigs, free to dream of all the hospital's smoking hot nurses that slowly were building up sympathy towards this rough yet handsome man as they delivered daily doses of meds into his bruised and battered mouth. The murderous pig incident and most of what comes next was before Blackie's buddy Rick left for a short trip back home to Montana. Leaving the country is often the best plan of action if one can afford the plane tickets. It's a way to avoid immigration paperwork. Rick was on a tentative visa status, and so was Blackie. The pair of foreigners were the only two people to ever step foot in the lean-to up on the hill. It served as a farming headquarters for a completely illegal marijuana operation. Blackie's visa situation was continuously under review. He was legally married to a Kiwi lady and did not have funds to make strategic trips abroad. The framework he invested in was another factor, but there were two ways of playing the visa game. One is to jump through the hoops and the other is to dig in and withstand the paperwork tornado. Slip and get deported with a big black X in your passport. Withstand the paperwork tornado? Blackie was not going back to Yorkshire. He was going to grow the best strains of marijuana on the most fertile hills known to modern man. The farm was located on the Coromandel Peninsula, which was famous for illegal harvests, producing coral gold continuously for over 60 years. New Zealand has the added bonus of a thin ozone layer, so the sun actually shines brighter. Plants love this. People get sunburned. Wear a hat, surf with a shirt on, be responsible, and don't pass out in direct sunlight. These are the rules to live by in a UV plant island paradise. Rick put a nice hole in the side of the lean-to 6 months ago because of an intruder, not the murderous pig variety. 2 weeks prior, things were going missing, with no pattern to the missing objects and knickknacks. The theory of a rogue Department of Conservation worker had been popular. This was definitely not the police, pigs, or tourists, and it was not another farmer. The missing items went as follows: candy by the handful, butter, bullets, only 4, all of the flashlights, 8, books, not the good ones, just the rando paperbacks, the good luck taxidermied hedgehog, all the black cards out of a deck, hearts and diamonds were spared, matches, single shoes, several dominoes, several bottles of wine, handfuls of buds. A normal farmer or a thief would have taken the chainsaw, the tools, the box of money, bags and bags of buds. The bags of candy. Both Blackie and Rick had a sweet tooth. At least 50 precious seedlings, marijuana, handmade pottery by Rick. The police would have just taken everything. Wild pigs would have taken nothing, but they would have made a giant mess of everything. Being a naturally paranoid pair, Blackie and Rick devised a simple plan to catch the intruder, kill and bury quickly. Not until a rather muddy night did the theory of the road DOC, Department of Conservation, worker get debunked by gigantic, muddy, ape-like footprints. The plan was still in action as visits and missing objects continued. It was difficult for Rick and Blackie to keep this a secret, as both of them are famous yarn spinners, tall tale extraordinaires, especially Blackie. The last thing Blackie and Rick wanted wandering around their hill was a Bigfoot hunting freaks and hipsters with their fancy gear, technology. These were the first-class nutters, and Blackie had dealt with them before in the hills of Northern California. Never again. Way more annoying than UFO buffs in the spectrum of conspiracy theorists. Blackie got his nose broken in a punch-up with a Bigfoot hunter in Northern California. At the same time, the lean-to had only a dozen more items to be stolen. Rick finally happened upon the Bigfoot and grazed his left arm with a .45 caliber bullet, which then continued through one side of the lean-to and out the other into a tree. Much of Rick's past dealt with the tracking and hunting of animals in Montana, and animals all do the same thing when wounded. Instead, the Bigfoot stuck his right thumb in the hole left by the bullet, laid down right there in front of the lean-to, and fell asleep, snoring. Rick was so startled that he lost momentum, and instead of killing the Bigfoot, he wrapped him up in a cocoon made of blankets and tarps. And Rick left the hill. Blackie was told the story and was advised not to go up the hill. not difficult as he was doing some carpentry work at the pub in the next town over. Luckily, the current step in the marijuana growing process needed almost no human interaction as long as the farm got a little bit of rain each day. Rick and Blackie kept off the hill, kept their mouths shut, and were unusually sober and unsocial for a week. 1 week, they reckoned, was enough time for the Bigfoot to get better and hopefully never return, or die, and get taken care of by the pigs. They were both secretly hoping the Bigfoot died, and his bones would remain as proof, even potentially making them both well-deserved money, as long as the pigs did not make too much of a mess of them. A hungry family of pigs will not leave a scrap. They'll take and bury the bones until they start to decompose enough to digest properly. I think there's helium in that joint. Rick and Blackie were able to stay off the hill for 4 days. Then curiosity got the better of them. They went up the hill, armed, to fight off a family of pigs. What they actually found was the intact tarp cocoon, just as Rick had left it. They worked together to safely and cautiously open the cocoon, and the Bigfoot was no longer snoring and his breath was weak. The area around the wound was covered in maggots, which saved its life by eating the decomposing flesh, thus keeping bacteria and infection at a minimum. His body temperature was high. The cocoon was steamy and moist. His calico hair was dark and growing a green sheen of mold. The crusties around his eyes were as thick as spackling and covered much of his flat nose and mouth. He had relieved himself several times in the past couple of days, adding depth and bouquet to the odors released into the fresh hillside air. Thinking back on their decision, Rick and Blackie never figured out why they took the chance of opening the cocoon instead of blasting it full of holes. As the Bigfoot opened one eye and peered through the crusties, Rick's face was in full view and only 2 feet away. Without a change in expression, he as slowly closed his eyes and remained limp in the spread open cocoon. In the glimpse, Rick saw the same big, dumb eyes so many of the horses had in Montana. Big, dumb, dark, hairy, trustful eyes. The bonus promised Blackie upon a timely scheduled completion of the bar in the next town over was enough to keep him busy and off the hill for 2 weeks. Rick nursed the Bigfoot and tended the crops, one-handed, constantly ready to shoot with his .45. He knew not to trust animals in distress or with injury. Instead of sleeping up on the hill in the lean-to, each night at dusk, Rick would make the long hike down to his little hut at the Kauri Creek Railway and Potteries. Everyone there was used to his nocturnal manners and periods of disappearance and happily tolerated his ways because Rick is genuinely charming and an absolutely fantastic potter. Rick's also one of the great old Montana cowboy horse-whispering heroes you only read about in romance novels, but he never smoked cigarettes, and there were the flip-flops, shorts, and pottery. He knew how to put a large animal out, stitch it up, keep it sedated, keep it from injuring itself, and enough to keep the creature out till the morning meds. He knew how to make a feeder bottle out of an empty wine bottle and electrical tape. A warm concoction of butter and peanut butter will sustain and rebuild a bear, and his new Yeti friend was of a similar omnivorous dietary needs. Soon Rick and the Bigfoot were like Han Solo and Chewbacca. The Bigfoot gently came to accept Blackie and then no one else. This friendship turned out to be very beneficial to the farm, as the terrain in New Zealand is such that it's almost impossible to transport anything using a cart. Maoris, the native New Zealanders, were master nautical navigators and kept up an amazing tradition of woven baskets and carrying cases. They did not, however, invent the wheel, because it wouldn't have done them any good. An 800-pound Bigfoot who knows the hills in the pitch black is as effective at transporting manure and supplies as a medium-sized helicopter, and quickly became instrumental in the operation. Blackie Where the fuck did it go? I get confused. Blackie invested the whole bonus from the carpentry job into the importation of more seeds than they knew what to do with. They developed plots further into the Department of Conservation land than had ever been farmed before, and outputs instantly quadrupled. Bigfoot worked a pretty loose schedule, as he spent the majority of his time doing his own thing so deep in the forest no one will know what Yetis do. After he healed up 100%, he was able to forage and hunt for himself. He would come and work when he wanted butter. He had a soft spot for Rick and Blackie, but it was his butter craving that pulled him out of the deep woods. As one might imagine, a Bigfoot would be disappointed with just a stick or two of butter. A Bigfoot does not give a shit about cholesterol or calories, neither did Rick or Blackie. Anyone who makes a daily chore to climb up and over the ridge running down the Coromandel Peninsula can use all the calories on Earth. It was amusing to see the Yeti eat 3 sticks of butter at a time and repeat it 5 times in a sitting. Butter was a tiny price to pay for the work the Yeti did. This would eventually be considered invaluable, and it gave them a crazy edge in the business. Blackie supplied a dairy farmer with a weekly order of half a pound of marijuana for as much butter as he could fit in a paper grocery bag. This was kept in Blackie's home fridge to be brought up to the lean-to in 15-stick bundles, kept cool in a semi-submerged cooler in a stream, fed by a spring fresh enough to drink safely. Other temperature-sensitive agricultural chemicals were in the cooler, and usually some beer. The bulk of the butter kept at Blackie's was used to convert the stems and leaves that are not comfortable to smoke into beautiful tetrahydrocannabinable, rich green butter used in the production of mind-expanding baked goods for those who do not enjoy smoking, or who just prefer to be incapacitated for an entire day. Blackie was a famous baker, using hints of cardamom and cayenne and a devilish application of the freshest lime and orange zest on the underside of the space cakes, which made for a semi-sweet snack the most prude of grandmas would lavish over before promptly falling asleep. A very nice work routine had developed. When Rick needed to go back to America for a month, Blackie would spend the vast majority of his time working the different plots of plantings scattered over the ridges. Often, He would pack a small tent and enough food and water for 3 days at a time. Blackie did not mind, as late spring in New Zealand forest is best enjoyed, deep in nature, slightly hungry and really high. His on-again, off-again girlfriend, not his wife, also needed a little time to herself, so this was perfect until the skirmish. The details are not worth going into, but Blackie fell short in the butter department, and Bigfoot would not settle for a puddle of butter mixed in with some organic agrochemicals in the bottom of a warm cooler. But before Blackie could explain, there was plenty more butter down in human land. Bigfoot lost his shit, and Blackie got pummeled. Blackie had received many pummelings in half a dozen amateur boxing clubs in Yorkshire. He would fight for practice, pints, and the hell of it, he delivered pummelings as well as taking them. This was very different, and it took 2 hook punches before his guard fell apart. Once his defense crumbled, it turned into good old-fashioned beating. Blackie had survived old-fashioned beatings as well. He felt the ribs crack 2 and 3 at a time. His shoulders were dislocated, but his arms, legs, and spine were shaken up real good, but still intact. The real harm was done to his head, his eyes, his nose, ears had never been so thoroughly boxed in. His face was a flat canvas bag of flour, and the impacts and howls rang in echo farther and farther away until Blackie knew it was over. He was dead. Killed by a Bigfoot-style dead. Not a bad way to go. He would have had the neatest of all the dead stories to spin in the pubs of heaven, even though Blackie was pretty convinced he was dead and already planning his grand entrance into heaven. He was not dead yet. Just right on the edge, just enough for his body to shut down without asking permission. He decided if the pigs came and finished him off, he would still stick to death by Bigfoot story in heaven. Bigfoot ran away to blow off some steam by toppling over half a dozen punga ferns, half a dozen tea trees, and rolling some really big boulders down some steep slopes in a nearby valley. But after all the physical therapy was done, Bigfoot was not going to let Blackie die. Not right away, because that would be sad. Bigfoot wrapped Blackie up in a cocoon made of blankets and a couple of garbage bags, which made him look like a giant papoose. He would place him in the middle of the road, widening up over the ridge. He had been down there twice, both during the blackest moonless nights, while taking each step as if the forest floor was covered in hedgehogs, and not carrying a giant package advertising, "Shoot me!" Bigfoot changed his mind and placed Blackie, the papoose, on the little cot in the lean-to and started administering candies dipped in the mixture of melted butter, organic agrochemicals, and the contents of a small bottle labeled, "This is not lethargic acid dithylamide you are looking for Rick's Happy Returns Party." 3 days later, the ceiling of his hospital room in Thames opened up like the lid in a jack in the box, and he floated up and hung out in the pubs of heaven for 1,000,000, billion, trillion years, or longer. This is a recipe for pop brownies. Alright. Blackie's Boingo brownies. 4 eggs. Some evaporated cane juice. Sugar, 3 cups. Green butter, 8 ounces. Peruvian dark chocolate cocoa, 1.5 cups. Flour, half a cup. Brandy, a teaspoon. 151, a teaspoon. Himalayan sea salt, half a teaspoon. Cardamom, a pinch, and a pinch of cayenne. Butter and dust with flour in an 8" by 8" tray. Mix all the ingredients, chuck them in. 290 Fahrenheit preheated for 42 minutes. Throw in a sprinkle of lemon and orange zest. Crank the oven for all it's got till you smell the zest. Get the shit out of there. Rack and cool. Alright, that's the first part of this Kauri Creek by Kris with a K. Lovesey. Yeah, just find the damn thing. I think it's like $3. Just get the whole fucking thing. It's not a piece of shit, but what are you going to do with $3? Okay, that's enough. I done this. Okay.